Thank you. Thank you. I want to talk today about how 3D movies can give you an emotional response that 2D movies, or rather to say they can evoke an emotional response that 2D movies cannot. Most people today are looking at and talking about 3D movies because of very few smart guys in Hollywood, primarily James Cameron, of course. His work in the early 90s, in Terminator 2 3D, carried on through to Avatar, the film that most everyone famously knows for 3D. And Avatar, of course, was a tremendous success. $2.78 billion in worldwide box office. That's the highest grossing film in the history of film. But before we get into that, certainly James Cameron did not invent 3D. I want to talk a little bit about how it all started out. Scientist by the name of Sir Charles Wheatstone first identified the process of stereopsis, the binocular vision of left and right eye, sending two unique perspectives to the brain and creating a depth sensation. Sir Charles Wheatstone developed a product called the stereoscope, which was just a little handheld viewer that you could put 3D photographs into. They were called view cards or stereo cards. And people could see 3D scenes. And this was a very common item to see in a Victorian home in the 1830s, 1840s. This was essentially the television of its time. Motion pictures wouldn't be invented for another 50 some odd years. And people would get these stereo view cards from around the world. Exotic locations and fantastic scenes would be depicted that they normally would only dream of seeing, and people would stare at them and pass the stereoscope around. And these were so prolific, you can still find them relatively inexpensively at flea markets and on eBay and things like that. So if you get a chance to see one of these, you may find it remarkable that a simple photograph, even though it's a still image, can really hold your attention much longer as a stereoscopic image than as a monoscopic image. You'll notice things like the texture of the clothing these gentlemen are wearing, or the ground or the rocks in the distance that the pyramids are from them. So it's quite a fascinating thing. Now, post-industrial revolution, a lot of things happened that kind of slowed down the economic progress of 3D. People were distracted by things like, World War I, the Depression, World War II, etc. But in the 1950s, when television came on the scene and they started filling American homes, Hollywood studios got very concerned that people were going to stop going to the cinema and stop seeing movies. And 3D technology had progressed through this period. In the 1920s, about 1922, there was a film called The Power of Love that was released, black and white film shot in 3D. And that was shown at a theater in Los Angeles, I believe the Ambassador Theater. And it was very well received. Audiences and critics liked it quite a bit. The film has since been lost. No one has seen that film in 3D or 2D, for that matter, in quite a long time. But in 1952, television was proliferating. Hollywood studios decided they were going to trot out 3D to try to captivate people's attention. A guy by the name of Arch Oboler created a film called Buona Devil. This was the first color feature film to be shown in stereoscopic 3D, and it did not use red and blue 3D glasses. It used a polarized system that gave people full color and a clear, bright picture in both eyes. Now, it was a low-budget film, even by 1952 standards. The film cost $400,000 to produce. By contrast, the highest-grossing film in 1952 was The Greatest Show on Earth, and that had a $4 million budget, so 10 times the budget of Buona Devil. Despite the low budget, Buona Devil made $2.7 million at the box office. And I consulted with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is a government agency, just on their website, and used an inflation calculator to determine that $400,000 in 1952 is equivalent to $3.5 million in 2012. So that's still a low budget by today's standards. That's an independent type film budget. And it did 2012 equivalent of $23.3 million at the box office. Now, of course, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is not taking movie theater ticket prices into account. It's just general inflation. So that $23.3 million might actually be even a larger number by today's standards. That aside, This got Hollywood's attention, and they were very interested in making more 3D movies, and Buona Devil actually started a craze. Over 100 3D films were released from 1952 to 1954. Horror films, thrillers, science fiction films. Most of them were sort of B movie fare. But towards the end, even some of the biggest directors in Hollywood got involved. Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder, very famous 3D film. But I don't really want this discussion to go into the details of the various technological and economical issues that 3D has gone through from 1952 to 2012. I'd like to focus on the fact that 3D is extremely polarizing, pardon the pun. But what I find is that people either love 3D or they hate it. When I meet people and tell them that I'm in 3D, sometimes they'll tell me, oh, I hate 3D. And I find this strange because normally when you tell someone, you meet someone at a dinner party and tell them what you do, you say like, I'm a lawyer. Oh, I hate lawyers. Well, that's possibly a bad example. But people don't usually come out and tell you they hate what you do when they don't even know you. But then other people tell me they love 3D and they're adamant about it. There's groups and conventions and all kinds of things. So I started to think about this. Why are people so passionate about 3D whether they love it or hate it? And it occurred to me that there are things that are happening in your brain when you're watching 3D that don't happen when you're watching 2D. There are elements of our visual process that are involuntary. Certainly most of it is voluntary. I choose to look at and read a water bottle. That's definitely a conscious decision that's under my control. But if someone were to throw a baseball at me from over there, I might see it involuntarily. My gaze would turn to it, and to avoid that danger, I'd duck out of the way. So when you sit in a monoscopic 2D movie, normal movie theater, obviously you're consciously aware that you're watching fiction, but your brain is very subconsciously aware that it is looking at images of things that are a safe distance away from you and pose no threat whatsoever. Now conversely, in a 3D movie theater, effigies of objects in the film project themselves into the theater and maybe right up to your face. And something very primal in your brain is telling you, hey, that's intruding in a way that I normally consider danger, or what is happening, you know? And so I started to think about and read on the internet various things about certain neuroscientists who have done research into the visual process and how the visual cortex works and all that kind of thing. And you can see in this diagram of the brain and the optic nerve and the visual cortex that vision really occupies a large portion of the brain and kind of goes all over it. Our optic nerves cross over and deliver information to various parts of the brain. So the other thing it brought to mind, how many people are familiar with the term the uncanny valley? Okay, so this is a term that originated in robotics, and it's basically used to describe a theory that people respond very well to cute, cuddly robots like R2-D2 because he looks like a garbage can with a fancy paint job. And as we get closer and closer to a realistic representation of a humanoid robot, we wind up with essentially a walking corpse that creeps people out. So in this effort to obtain realism, and you guys have probably seen this in computer animation, it also applies to bad plastic surgery. You know, if something is just very slightly wrong with something that we're very familiar with in our reality, it triggers something in the brain that immediately tells you, hey, this isn't right and it's making me uncomfortable. So I had an experience in a movie theater in 1991, a revival of the Three Stooges short, Spooks. And, yeah, roll the video, please. So the film is about a mad scientist who kidnaps a woman and wants to swap her brain with a gorilla. And the Three Stooges are trying to rescue her. And in this scene, the mad scientist comes right at the audience, right at the camera with this huge hypodermic needle. And I apologize, we're only showing it in 2D, but in 3D, this needle comes substantially off screen. Really, really comes out into the audience space and is right in your face. And I was watching this in a movie theater in New York City with probably about 100 or 200 people, and well more than half of the theater had a profound emotional response to this particular scene. half the theater was like, whoa, whoa, you know, putting their hands up and leaning back and calling out like that. And I thought to myself, when have you ever been in a movie where this many people had such a strong reaction to what's going on screen? And this wasn't a major drama that had people engrossed in what was going on. This was an 8-minute goofy Three Stooges thing. But that 3D moment was so powerful, and people were enjoying it, of course. So many people tell me that they find 3D can be intrusive and things like that, but you know, bear with me because I think there's still more to it. Salvador Dali, as everyone knows, famous surrealist, guy who was fascinated with the concept of perception and manipulating perception. Dali became fascinated with stereoscopy in the 1950s, and he did a series of stereoscopic paintings. You can see them sometimes in traveling exhibits, and he's got them on permanent display at his museum in Figueres, Spain. He's got what's called the Hall of Stereoscopy, where the pictures are arranged in what I've shown right here, and it's a little difficult to see in this monoscopic photograph, but this is an arrangement of two mirrors that are sort of 45 degrees, they're oriented at a 45-degree angle to one another, and then two paintings at sort of 45-ish degrees to them. And what happens is the viewer goes up and you put your nose right up to where the mirrors intersect, and you see this image in 3D. So Dali was fascinated by the concept that neither the left canvas nor the right canvas were the actual image, and that the only true image was the virtual canvas that existed in the viewer's mind. And he experimented with putting things in one that weren't in the other, and if you see them, you can really start to get a feeling for how it plays with your brain and everything like that. And so there really is something going on in your brain when you watch a 3D movie that is not happening in a 2D movie and cannot happen. During a 2D movie, there's a portion of your brain that's just inactive and asleep. Now, it's not to say that all 3D movies are taking proper advantage of this or that all filmmakers understand this capability of stereoscopic cinema. But the next time you see a 3D film, and if you don't like it, I hope you'll think about some of these things and wonder if it's that the film was poorly made or that you actually are feeling intruded upon by this sort of hyper-real experience. And I hope that everyone will go enjoy some 3D movies. I want to thank everybody for listening to me talk.